Good day and welcome back to Below the Curve Gaming. And today we have the second of our scenery reviews, and this time it is of our Antenocitis Workshop terrain, which you'll have seen in our last battle report. Now this is going to be a bit different from the Kaldstorm scenery because we bought heavily into this terrain. There will be images on the screen showing the items we bought as well as how much they cost. But rather than talk about each individual piece, we're going to give an overview of how we found the kits to build. Again, we're going to split it into three parts where we talk about the building and buying side of things and the pros and cons, then the gaming and immersion side of things and the pros and cons, and then we'll do a conclusion where we give them a mark out of 5, and that will be just sort of for the terrain as a whole. So without further ado, we're going to cut over to Ben, who's going to take us through the pros of the building and buying of our Antenocitis Workshop terrain.
So looking at the pros for the terrain, the first one, which should hopefully be evident on the pictures we've got here, it's all pre-painted. The colours are very vibrant and they really look great on the battlefield. There's a large range of terrain with different styles. Now we've gone for all the buildings that look like a food court and a few office blocks, but there's different ranges that you can also look at on the website as well, from forward bases to a kind of undertown look. It's UK based, which for us is a large benefit. We did look at other companies which were based all over the world, and with shipping, obviously that's perhaps taken a hit with COVID, and availability from some of these stores, it would prove to be quite slow to get to us, and we didn't want to sink a fair amount of cash into a range of terrain that then we would have to wait months before it arrived and then have to build up after that. We were looking to get the terrain on the board in a relatively quick fashion, and UK-based was one of the big selling points from that. So the MDF is well cut. I would still use a knife to cut each bit out because they are held in with a couple of wee tabs almost, or bits that aren't cut to allow them to stay on the frame. However, they all come with instructions which are on the website, and I would advise also using the instructions to build them, just in case, because some of the pieces aren't necessarily as easy to work out where they go without clear instructions. The MDF is durable. It's 3mm thick, I believe, and seems to be able to take a wee bit of wear and tear. We haven't been throwing them around, to be fair. We've been very precious over them, but MDF is generally quite durable. It's relatively affordable, I would say a mid-range price. They're not the cheapest terrain on the market, but we have seen boards that are more expensive to pick up, and for pre-painted buildings, we felt that the price was in a good range for ourselves. One thing we did find out is they've got very good customer service. We did receive a few of our buildings that were either missing pieces or had alternative bits in them that weren't for that set. We contacted them via Facebook. They were very quick to apologise and send out replacements, and they even sent us a PDF so we could print some of the advertising for the bits that were missing, so I could get the buildings finished in a quick time rather than having to wait for them to turn up for some of the photo paper type inserts. So those are the pros that we can see with them. So I'll pass back to Martin and he'll go over the cons.
So the first thing that we have to say about these is they're incredibly time consuming to build. If you remember back to our last video, we said that you could probably knock out a box in about an hour. These buildings you're looking at potentially 2 or 3 hours per building. This is not a case of they turn up in beautiful boxes, but it's not a case of crack the box open, quickly slot the stuff together and bang it on your gaming board. This is a weekend's worth of building, and you do need to be careful when you're doing it as well. As Ben said, the instructions are online, but you have to find them. And I found that some of the sets, namely the Squiddly Diddly set, which is the sort of hexagonal restaurant with the big squid on top, the pieces did not correspond to the instructions. Now, they had made us aware that some of the sets had been recut, but it doesn't look like all the instructions have received the memo. And for the Squiddly Diddly, I was 2/3 of the way through gluing the blooming thing together when I realised that there was absolutely no way it was going to go together. I had to prise it apart, bear in mind I'd used super glue, and then reassemble it. And even then I had to cut tabs off one of the pieces because it just got to a point where it wasn't going together. And I found that quite frustrating because when you're building terrain is usually quite stressful to build, because if it's even slightly not level or something doesn't line up, it can affect the entire build in a way that, gluing a head on a slightly wrong angle, you can just lift it off and put it back in. It's not the end of the world. But terrain, if you suddenly have 2/3 of a building built and you realise that one wall doesn't touch the floor, you can have a real problem. We did find the price racked up very, very quickly. So yes, the buildings are about £26 to £30 each, but you need to bear in mind that the Kallstrom buildings were averaging £6 each. So you were getting 4 Kallstrom buildings to the equivalent of the Happy Panda noodle bar. And by the time we'd added on our triad signs, the security barriers, the extra set tables, the metro stations, we conservatively would have spent, I would suggest, about £300 on our board, which is a significant amount of money. And things like the interiors are extra. They don't necessarily come with them. They do bundles where you can get them together, but if you don't realise that, you can get the building, go to build it and realise it has no interior. And as we're going to discuss in the gaming and immersion, we felt the interiors were really important, certainly for what we were looking for. So you do need to pay attention to the website, and I would be the first to admit it's something that we have been guilty of not doing in the past. So now we're moving on to the gaming and immersion side of things, and once again I will go through the pros in these, and then Ben will discuss the cons. So the first thing, and this is a big pro for particularly the immersion but also the gaming, is that they have multiple ranges and there is enough in each range to make a full board. So if you look at it and you think, well, those look really nice, but I just don't see myself fighting over a downtown Asian style food court, I'd much rather fight over an Ariadne forward observing post because my mate has combined army and it maybe feels a bit more realistic. They have a range that does that. They have a sort of seedy undercity that's got a sort of dubious bar, it's got a tattoo parlour, it's got things like that. So they've got these different options so you can have the board you want, which I think is a real bonus. And tied to that is the fact that it looks infinity, as it were. And this is something we said in our previous video, that very much the iconography on it and the billboards and that really screamed infinity. And this screams infinity again. It's at the correct scale. It has those triad hollow boards that advertise infinity style products. They've got the weapons that come on the grey market look like the infinity weapons, particularly the ones that the Pano and the Yujing use. So everything about the board looks right. It doesn't look like you're taking Games Workshop terrain, for example, or just another company's generic terrain. And for example, Battle Systems, which Ben and I used to play on, which had very much a District 9 feel to it, and then we were trying to sort of shoehorn it into our Infinity games. Tied again to this are the fact that the colours are bright, they're vibrant, they've got these beautiful acrylic signs, they've got, and you'll see it in our photos, these sort of hollow boards that stick out the side. Now those are attached with a magnet on the inside, so you can actually move them to where you want and then you just clamp the magnet on the other side of the wall. But it gives that look of those infinity buildings from the rule books and the source books, which is really nice because You feel like you're playing in the Infinity universe. The quality of the paint is also very high. It doesn't scrape off when you're putting bits together. If you brush a thumb against it, it doesn't wipe off the top layer. And so that's really good because you feel that your board's going to last. Now your buildings come with different footprints. You've got L shapes, you've got square shapes, you've got hexagons, you've got long rectangles. And tied to that is something we discussed in the previous video about the alley, as it were, where you've got all your square buildings and it just creates a sort of grid, and there's nowhere to take cover unless you put down barriers and that. These have porches that stick out. They have doorways set into the buildings that you can tuck a fusilier or, heaven forbid, a hack toe if you're feeling sadistic into, giving sort of firing positions, and it's more realistic. As you might have seen in a previous video, Ben was able to move a fire team through the building, take up a position behind the bar and open up on my troops. The doors would provide cover and you could fire through them. They look good. The interiors are really well laid out. You can fit models in, but there's cover there. And they look sensible. They make sense. And not just you lift the roof off and it's all open apart from a computer desk. They look like how the inside of a building should look, whilst allowing you to move a model on a 25mm base through. And they cover a good area. They're deceptively big, and things like the Zen Garden, which you may have seen with our Buddha and the little trees and the rocks, and the Grey Market, which is a sort of market that's got the sort of circular advertising boards on top of them, they can actually cover really quite a substantial area, break up your board nicely, give you cover, and look good. You can spread the market around a bit, you can expand the Zen Garden, and you'll get a good footprint covered. And this opens up into, it creates a really diverse gaming experience, because one day you could have your market all together, almost like a classic city centre market where the stalls are end to end, or you could dot it around in a way of more a shantytown sort of look. You could split the Zen Garden in half and maybe have half on one side of the Kobe cow and the other half on the other side of the Squiddly Diddly, or you could just have a Zen Garden walled in. One day you could have the Kobe cow and the Holy Fuchs side by side for like two restaurants, which will take up quite an area and it'll create quite a unique look. And then the next game you could have them opposite sides, in a way that the Kaldstrom buildings never allowed you to do, because they all had the same footprint and the same shape, and from above you couldn't tell which building was which. So it really means that no two games of Infinity will be the same. You've got the walls that you can create a courtyard or a compound, or you could stuff them all together and not use them, or you could split them up across the board and just have like a wall sticking off here, like almost for a car park. If you had little resin cars, you could put them behind. It allows a lot more variation and means that you won't get bored of your terrain. You won't be looking to add to it constantly in the same way.
So moving on to the cons. So firstly, there's a lot of pieces. It's slow to set up due to this, and you need to have a good thought about what you're looking to set up. As much as Martin explained the possibilities with the grey market, the different eateries and the office blocks, etc., you do then need to almost create that narrative in advance and work out what you're wanting the board to look like for this game. And with the very obvious buildings in terms of what each one is, there will be kind of placements that may not work or may kind of not look right, if that makes sense. It's not something that you necessarily got with the Kaldstrom terrain, and that you could put all of them next to each other because they looked so similar. One of the things that we've found with the setup that we've bought is the mat that we've been using, the Underhive mat by TT Combat, which is a very nice mat for the Kaldstrom terrain and fits with the kind of aesthetic of that. It doesn't particularly work for the scenery here, and the reason for that is the lack of roads. We have picked up multiple of the metro sets, which we wanted the bright acrylic look of them and the kind of bus stops to to put around our board to just break things up and offer a slightly different piece of blocking terrain and a bit of character to the board. However, without a road printed on the mat, it looks out of place. So we have subsequently bought a new mat to go with this terrain. However, that is an extra expense that you'll need to factor in if you are looking for some of these pieces of terrain. The Kallstrom scenery had the benefit in some ways that you could place that down on top of most mats without it looking too out of place. It could be on a plains or a snow mat, and it could just look like a kind of prefab buildings that were placed down. However, the selection we've picked, because it looks like they should go in an inner city, really without a mat that says this is a city mat, it looks a wee bit out of place. So moving on to our scores. So we're marking this out of 5, and there's 5 categories that we're also scoring out of 5 before we get our overall score. So the first category is value for money, and we've given this a 4 out of 5 for value for money. It is expensive, so we've spent £350 so far on terrain from Antenocitis Workshop to make our board before we factor in the cost of the new mat to go with that. It's not a small expense. It's not something that you would buy if you were necessarily running a gaming club where you need multiple boards. This is very much for your home experience to have your one great looking board. As much as it is expensive to buy this board, you're getting real quality with it. There's a lot of options. If you enjoy building terrain, then there's quite an experience to be had in building this terrain. The other thing with it is it's an investment. It's not a set of terrain that you're going to throw away and buy a new board in the same way that you might do with a Kallstrom terrain once that either wears out or you need to move on to a different playing experience, or you see something else that pops up and you think, that looks better. This is really nice terrain, and I can see it being something that we would look to add to as opposed to replace anytime soon.
So next we have the ease of build, and we've given this a 3 out of 5. Some of these buildings are difficult. The Swiddly Diddly in particular, the Holy Fuchs, Ben found quite stressful, I think is the correct term. Some of them come with clear perspex, which you have to be very, very careful as to how you glue them. I found that assembling the little fridges on the inside of the buildings, the doors that they gave did not correspond. They were upside down for the fridges. They would have looked really wrong if I had glued them together the way the instructions showed. It is very time consuming. As I said, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours per building. The grey markets took me an absolute age to make and had to trim about 1 millimetre of resin off the inserts so they would fit into the grey markets, which leads on to the fact it requires focus. You can't slap YouTube on in the background and you sit having a natter and talking other stuff. You'll make mistakes. You need to be focused on it, which actually doesn't necessarily create the most enjoyable experience.
So moving on to storage, and for storage we've given it a 3 out of 5. Yet again, as we had with the Kallstrom scenery, a big box, we use a tough crate as key for keeping this in good condition. Need to be careful as well from packing it in. They don't have the bonus of every building fitting in the same shape, so you're going to find that you need to work out the best way to place them in. It's almost like Tetris getting those buildings in at times. Need to make sure there's nothing that's going to bash off other bits as well. As much as they are quite durable, it could be damaged fairly easily by being kind of scraped against something that's quite sharp. So something I would be quite careful over. It is obviously expensive, so you don't want to be throwing it around, and I would make sure it's kept in a nice clear box that you can make sure that nothing's going to be laid on top of it or that would cause any wear to it.
So for the gaming experience you'll get from this, we give this 5 out of 5. Because each board you can set up to be different, you're going to get a really varied look. No two games are going to be the same, but it's not just going to be, well, we shifted the buildings around and maybe didn't put a tower at this side. It's the fact that you can completely move them, you can put courtyards, you can take bits away, you can move the tables around. If you've got the roads, you can place a metro system down. It just gives you so many more options. If you owned other pieces by Antenocitis Workshop, you could have like a housing district. They just give you so many more options, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Unless you really set out to be awkward, your table is always going to look really good. However you lay it out, you could totally split the Zen garden up and just have like individual planter pots all around just to, create that green zone. You could create a series of smaller courtyards using the Kobe cows, gates and fences set. There's so many ideas that you could have. And with the buildings having these interiors that you can get into, the tops lift off very easily, it opens up a completely different way of playing that takes away from the castling. They don't have these parapets, they don't have ways to get onto the roof, but you can move through buildings instead. You can fire in and out of them, you can draw line of sight through some of the buildings. Now obviously if you're going to be doing this, discuss it with your opponent first. Say to them, well actually you can see from the window at this side all the way through out the door at the other side, so are we playing that that's a clear line of fire, yes or no? There are some that the windows will be on like the sort of two arms of the L but won't go all the way around, so a model inside can fire out of two different directions. It gives you a lot of options, it makes it more interesting. In the previous video that we did, I had an Order Sergeant Hacker make a mad run through a building because I could, giving me cover, meaning I didn't need to expose myself to an Alpha Seed fire team, which was hugely important for me to achieve one of the classified objectives. Ben was able to get some super soldier team inside and start firing out through the noodle hatch in one of the buildings, which was really exciting as well, because these aren't things you could do without serious suspension of disbelief using the Kaldstrom terrain. So we felt it really, really added to our gaming experience and made our game better, which I think is something you want terrain to do. Terrain should not hinder, it should accentuate a game.
And finally, we've got durability and longevity, which we've given a 4 out of 5 for it. So the terrain itself, as we've said, is quite tough. I still would be quite careful with it, but it shouldn't be something that will break easy without kind of rough handling. It should, with the pre-painted look to it, keep its colour quite nicely. Unless you're having it in direct sunlight, I would avoid that. It's also, as we said, it's stuff that you would be unlikely to replace. You may add stuff into the collection so you can have different looks to it. You could add, as Martin says, pick up some of the other sets to start having the edge of the city itself, or you could even pick up some of the forward base bits if you wanted a slightly different look to a kind of business district or that. But you can add to it, but you're still going to get some good use out of this. So overall, with a value for money of 4 out of 5, an ease of build of 3 out of 5, storage of 3 out of 5, a gaming experience of 5 out of 5, and 4 out of 5 for durability and longevity. This gives us an overall mark of 4 out of 5 for Antenocitis Workshop's terrain.
So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and if you'd like the video, we'd be very much appreciated. And we hope to see you in videos soon, where we will be playing over said terrain again, in what we hope will be an exciting new game for you. Take care and happy gaming.